Next, we have Audra Merfeld Langston, who comes to us from the French department at the Missouri University of Science and Technology. She's currently working on Marcel Aymé's wartime and post-war writings, and has published on his novel Uranus, and has an article forthcoming on Le Chemin des Écoliers. Today she will present a paper entitled Judging Justice, Marcel Aymé's LaTête des autres, and the Press.
When Marcel Aymé's play La Tête des autres premiered at the Théâtre de l'Atelier in Paris on February 15, 1952, it created a scandal hotly debated in the press for more than 2 months. As Aymé's biographer Michel Lecureur noted, very quickly it became the play that one had to have seen. The show elicited vitriolic reactions from offended judges and lawyers for what the Federal Union of Magistrates considered outrage au corps judiciaire, and was nearly banned, thereby guaranteeing that it sold out 2 weeks in advance. More than 60 years later, in March of 2013, the play opened at the Vieux Colombier in Paris to similar box office success, but to radically different press reactions, overwhelmingly positive this time, that include Aymé among France's great authors of the 20th century. What was so scandalous about the play in 1952 that had become admirable in 2013? For starters, Aymé's boldness in putting the French justice system on trial and in denouncing the death penalty. Although the action takes place in the imaginary country of Moldavia, its similarities with post-war France were too evident to be ignored. But whereas many of his contemporaries considered that Aymé had gone too far and without justification, today's critics, with the benefit of hindsight of the post-war period, praise his powers of observation and his willingness to address issues from which other writers shied away. This paper will analyze La Tête des autres and its reception in the press. Its first performance came at a time when the liberation and its ensuing justice remained fresh in the public's mind, and thus Aymé's audiences would have grasped easily his very thinly veiled references to real people and events. After discussing the general context in which the first performance took place, I will focus my analysis on how the play was received in the written press. Although notable performances also took place in 1959, 1989, and 2000, and a television production was recorded in 1973, time constraints limit me to a discussion of the play's reception in 1952 and 2013. In particular, I will examine aspects of the performance that appear most salient to journalists of the two time periods, and then explore what information this conveys about the post-war period in France. Like his novels Travelling, Le Chemin des Écoliers, and Uranus, which depict, respectively, the rise of the Popular Front, occupied Paris, and life in a small village during the Purge, La Tête des autres zeroes in on hypocrisy, dishonesty, and crime. The plot revolves around the justice system's treatment of jazz player Valorin, falsely accused of murder. Tried on trumped-up charges and condemned to death, Valorin escapes and conveniently finds his way into the home of the prosecuting attorney, Maillard, whose entourage, including his 2 children, delights in having procured his 3rd head. Spectators quickly discover the arbitrariness of the condemnation. In Act 1, Scene 2, one of Maillard's guests calls him Mon cher magicien. Were it not for the bust of Enlightenment philosopher and magistrate Montesquieu included in the scene's decor, we might miss the allusion to Lettres Persanes, an epistolary novel in which a Persian foreigner in France compares the king to a magician, as he has the power to control his subjects' belief. His superior in magicianry, the Pope, convinces people that 3 are really 1, and that bread is not bread. Maillard's comparable powers of persuasion resulted in a jury convicting an innocent jazz player. The plot thickens. Valorin's alibi for the night of the murder is none other than Robert, the wife of Maillard's colleague Berthollier. Robert, a femme fatale, is also Maillard's mistress. To further complicate matters, Juliette, Maillard's wife, falls for Valorin during his stay in their home. All the while, Valorin attempts to convince Maillard and Berthollier to do the right thing, to find the real guilty party. Robert hires assassins to kill Valorant. They mistake Maillard for the musician but fail to kill anyone. At the heart of the entire problem, though, lies the fact that no one in this Poldavian world can do anything without the permission of the trafficker Alessandro Vici, who controls everything in the country. Audiences of 1952 would have recognized in the character of Alessandro Vici the notorious Romanian junk dealer Josef Joanovici, a Gestapo agent and black marketeer with ties to the murders of several resistance members. In addition to Alessandro Vici's powers to make and break ministers and judges, the parallel with Joanovici would have been clear from the decor of Alessandro Vici's home, cluttered with old newspapers, bags of fabric, mismatched furniture, and mattresses. To render more potent the theme of arbitrariness that permeates the play, a portrait of Hitler peeks out from behind a portrait of Churchill. Nearby are Stalin and Roosevelt. We are left with the notion that they are easily interchangeable. Prior to World War II, Marcel Aymé was best known as the author of fanciful stories and novels, such as La Jument Verte and Les Contes du Chat Perché. During the war years, Aymé, who lived in Montmartre with his wife and his stepdaughter, faced the difficult task of feeding himself and his family, as did many other writers. He chose to continue to live by his words and contributed articles to collaborationist newspapers, including Je suis partout, La Gerbe, and Aujourd'hui. Following the liberation, he was harshly critiqued for having done so, even though none of his publications were classified as pro-German, and his name did not figure among the writers on the blacklist. He faced further ostracization by some publishers and critics for vociferously defending Robert Brasillac, Louis-Ferdinand Céline, and Maurice Bardèche. Brasillac condemnation for collaborationism prompted Aymé to sign and promote a petition in support of the commuting of his death sentence. Charles de Gaulle ultimately refused to pardon Brasillac, who was executed by firing squad on February 6, 1945. This event, along with other experiences in Aimé's life, clearly influenced the writing of La Tête des Autres. Notably, Aymé reveals that he was left deeply troubled after witnessing an execution while on assignment as a young journalist. Aymé found inspiration in the Stavisky affair as well, which he referred to as en franche rigolade, because the procureur, the president, and everyone had wanted to stifle it. Aymé was frustrated about not being allowed to write about it in the newspapers. In 1952, opinions about La Tête des Autres, directed by André Barsac, were drastically divided, and discussion about it went on for months in the press, as did the discussion about the discussion of the scandal. On the one side were those who admired Aimé's boldness and honesty. On the other were those who considered that Aymé had gone too far in his critique of the justice system. Given the prominence of the debate in the press, I will focus my comments in this part of my paper on the scandal, including Marcel Aymé's own reactions to it. There are, however, many other themes that emerge in the critics' comments. Even before the first performance, the play touched raw nerves. One maître called the theater with instructions to give away his seats, as he could not attend a play whose subject targeted the justice system and questioned the respectability of the magistrature. Once the play officially opened, the mudslinging began. Robert Kemp in Le Monde criticized Marcel Aymé for going too far, for not stopping with the magistrature, but for striking out against tout ce qui nous reste. He left the theater outraged, writing, Je me bouche les yeux, les oreilles, je n'en peux plus. Paul Abran in Libération wrote, Nos grandes institutions valent encore, Dieu merci et de loin, mieux que cet affligeant tableau, and accused Marcel Aymé of insensitive cruelty, an assessment that appears repeatedly in articles. We should be disappointed, Abran suggested, that a talented author like Marcel Aymé used his skills for such premeditated outrages. One of Marcel Aymé's most vicious critics was fellow writer François Mauriac, who published an angry diatribe in Le Figaro, in which he denounced the tombereau d'ordures que, chaque soir à l'atelier, Monsieur Marcel Aymé déversait sur les magistrats français. Mauriac invoked Aristophanes and Molière, noting that while they were heavy hitters, quote, they did not sully the children and wives of their victims. They didn't hide under a comic mask, a face convulsed with hate, end quote. Mauriac's response prompted the writer Antoine Blondin to reply. He chastised Mauriac for bearing false witness about the play, just as he routinely bore false witness about the history through which France had just lived. Aymé, known for his silence, was incited by Mauriac to respond. Il est facile de dire et d'écrire que La Tête des autres est une pièce politique dictée par une haine partisane. Quant à en fournir la démonstration, c'est une autre affaire. Quoi qu'en pense M. François Mauriac, je ne sais pas ce qu'est la haine, sinon pour avoir éprouvé, en tant qu'écrivain, celle de certains confrères. He further explained that had he wanted to express disagreeable truths about current political and judicial events, he would not have had to resort to the theater to do so, as society provided ample documentation, of which, Aymé noted, Mauriac seemed unaware. Professionals within the justice system quickly expressed their own outrage in an open letter penned by André Sauvageau, the Secrétaire général de l'Union fédérale des magistrats. The letter, which appeared in Le Figaro, began with a seemingly contradictory statement. Monsieur, croyez que les magistrats savent rire d'eux-mêmes. Ils ont lu Rabelais sans souffrir, et ils ont applaudi Racine sans amertume. Apparently, though, they did not recognize themselves in the mirror that Aymé held up for them. They found nothing to laugh at, and like Mauriac, defended the wives and children of magistrates, whom they felt Aymé had callously mistreated in his play. Aymé underlined the error in such interpretations, pointing out that the main character is neither a prosecutor nor a prosecutor's wife, but a man wrongly condemned to death. The media of 1952 did discuss other topics associated with the play, its actors, farcical elements, and literary value, as well as Aymé's other writings. However, Aymé's treatment of the justice system overshadowed all of these discussions. Ultimately, and in spite of the tremendous success of the play, Aymé was so affected by the debate surrounding La Tête des autres that he rewrote the ending for the 1959 performance, completely eliminating the character of Alessandro Vici. The most widely available version of the play in print today, however, remains the original 1952 ending, and it was this ending that was performed in Paris this past spring. Choosing to perform the original ending figures among the many praiseworthy feats that Swiss director Lilo Bor accomplished, according to contemporary critics. One journalist writes, Lilo Bor a eu le bon goût de ne pas se référer à la première version. Another writes that the first version is d'une force corrosive terrible, and acknowledges that the second version suppressed Alessandro Vici because he was a character that post-war France did not want to see. With temporal distance, the first version is not only tolerable, but preferable. Overall, the press reacted admiringly to the spring 2013 performances of La Tête des autres at Vieux Colombier, with very few exceptions. The closest it came to a scandal was a debate on France Culture, during which one of the guests proclaimed that he hated the play and reproached Aymé for having published in collaborationist newspapers and defended Brasillac. Other critics in various articles mentioned Aymé's suspect reputation, but quickly turned to other subjects. For this performance run, there was no outcry from lawyers or judges, no public taking of sides by other writers, no scandal. The preoccupations of the media in 2013 differ drastically from those in 1952. I've chosen two of the more salient themes to develop here, the mise en scène and the portrayal of women. The mise en scène was one of the most noteworthy aspects of the play in 2013. Critics commended Lilo Bor for having expertly captured a 1950s style. But not just any style. It's the seduction of the polar angle that they admire, and in particular the style of American film noir. The women seem to have stepped out of a Hollywood film. Florence Viala, who played Robert, seemed the perfect reincarnation of Lana Turner, or Scarlett Johansson in The Black Dahlia. Laurent Lafitte as Valerin was a mix of John Travolta in Saturday Night Fever and Marlon Brando in A Streetcar Named Desire. This cinematic ambience and the Hollywoodian music together intensified the action and created suspense to the extent that Lilo Bor réussit à nous faire voyager intelligemment dans une époque rêvée. Bor's invocation of nostalgia to create a simple and effective mise en scène suits the play marvelously. There are a lot of quotes in here, while adding a legitimate and subtle distance with the facts reported in the play. We can thus avoid a farcical representation and get to the heart of Aymé's arguments. We can still laugh, albeit with a rire jaune, but we do so with the understanding of hindsight. The polar angle adds depth to the characters and makes the author's intentions resonate. One journalist suggests that the explosive force of the play, which he or she, it's unclear if it's a man or woman, would seem, so the play would seem long and forced, appuyé, without the cleverness of its film noir ambiance. In short, the press of 2013 suggests that Bohr's mise en scène, which establishes a safe distance from the actual events it portrays, encourages audience to consider the play's themes seriously. One of the reasons why the play is so powerful, despite the temporal distance between its creation and its most recent performance, is that its themes remain relevant, a fact about which numerous articles commented. Justice and scandal make daily headlines. Sébastien Le Foll of France Culture laments the fact that we do not have a Marcel Aymé with us today to tell the stories of the Dutroux or Crédit Lyonnais affairs or the comeback of Bernard Tapie. But the play's relevance extends to other realms as well, and I would like to turn to one of these now, notably the feminine roles in La Tête des autres. Whereas a number of journalists in 1952 were scandalized by Aymé's portrayal of women, those of 2013 expressed opposite reactions, praising the women's initiative in procuring their own liberty. Fabienne Darche of Le Monde, for example, asserts that one of the aspects we rediscover in the play is une vision de la liberté des femmes tout à fait étonnante pour l'époque. Another journalist writes that the actress who plays Roberte, Florence Viala, is a perfect femme fatale qui veut vivre ses amours à l'égal des hommes, while Véronique Vella convincingly pours Juliette as a desperate housewife, brisant ses chaînes avec une détermination héroïque. Philippe Lançon of Libération sees Roberte as the only respectable character, as she is free and wild enough not to reduce her life to base acts in disguise. C'est elle, he writes, demi-pute et fière de l'être, qui finit par dire la vérité, toute la vérité. Furthermore, she is the only character, in his opinion, who can be saved, as the others, including Valerin, are either losers, whiners, or both. One journalist refers to the female characters as heroines transfigured by love. Another journalist, writing about their vindication of their liberty, suggests that Juliette and Roberte prefigure the total independence of 21st century women. An article by the Théâtre Vieux Colombier heavily emphasized this aspect of the play, with nearly a third of the text devoted to the theme of emancipation, noting in particular Juliette's questioning of masculine authority. Roberte, meanwhile, fights to live out her desire with la liberté d'un homme. Her adultery is no different than theirs, and her actions demonstrated her denouncement of the injustice to which women are subjected. Therefore, Roberte's infidelity to her husband and to her lover, Maillard, along with her attempt to have Valerin assassinated, are not evidence of fickleness, but rather of resourcefulness. Roberte is bold and willing to take control of her own fate. That the journalists of today should have such a different perspective on this and other themes in the play is not surprising, given the social and cultural changes that have taken place in France since 1952. Today's journalists are more willing than yesterday's to overlook the suspicions surrounding Aymé's loyalties and to appreciate his writings for what they are in terms of their entertainment value and their critique of the society in which they were created. In fact, numerous journalists contended that the performance of the play provides evidence that Marcel Aymé has been undervalued. Armel Elliot of Le Figaro, for example, proposed that the show permitted spectators to celebrate a remarkable writer, trop longtemps délaissé, adding, on ne peut que se réjouir de voir enfin cet écrivain capital revenir au premier plan. Sébastien Le Foll noted that Marcel Aymé's reputation has not been taken seriously and that he is not only a great prosateur, but also one of France's most brilliant moralists. Fabienne Darche writes in Le Monde about cette pièce incroyable que l'on redécouvre avec stupéfaction et jubilation. One journalist asks, pourquoi laisse-t-on Marcel Aymé dans les placards? Finally, Philippe Tesson of Le Figaro magazine proclaims that Aymé est enfin vengé et de belle façon. This assessment implies that not only has Aymé been undervalued, but that he was also wronged by his contemporaries. I agree that Aymé is a writer who deserves to be taken more seriously for addressing, both in his fiction and nonfiction, what he saw as the injustices of his world. He was unafraid of expressing his opinions, of holding up a mirror to a society that did not always welcome the image reflected therein. Historian Anne Simonin has dismissed La Tête des Autres as, quote, a poorly put together and extreme play, end quote. She places Marcel Aymé firmly within the Opposition Nationale, a group which, she contends, was attempting to rewrite history via the literature they produced, and to, quote, recognize the jurisdiction of only one court, the mirror of literature, end quote. I would argue that La Tête des Autres does not deserve to be categorized thus, and that the press articles of 2013 reflect a similar consensus. The astounding number of unbelievable coincidences in the play, which I don't have time to go into today, lead readers and spectators to understand that they are to willingly suspend their disbelief, that they are not to accept the play as an accurate reflection of historical fact, but rather as a sarcastic and exaggerated critique of post-war France. In comparison with other writers active during the 1940s and 1950s, Aymé has been shortchanged in terms of serious study of his works. Several monographs dedicated to him are supplemented by only a handful of scholarly articles. He is often mentioned only in passing in longer works on writers during the occupation or on the literary purge. And yet so many objects of study pertinent to our understanding of World War II and the post-war period in France appear regularly in Aymé's work. Gender, the black market, cross-cultural relationships, and collaboration, to name only a few. The analysis I have presented here provides a beginning for examining the changing attitudes toward a writer, a play, and an era. But I've only looked at two ends of the timeline and at only a few themes therein. Further teasing out of the play's motifs and the reactions to them for the 1952 and 2013 performances, as well as for the other performances, is necessary. It is also crucial to address the aspects of the play that the press barely mentions, if at all, such as the role of the artist in society. It was no accident that Aymé chose a jazz player to represent the innocent victim, yet this topic escapes media comment in both 1952 and 2013. Finally, we must consider how the questions of Aymé's play raises and the reactions to them relate to larger discussions about the justice of France's justice system. The widely publicized trials in the 1990s of Paul Touvier and Maurice Papon immediately come to mind as examples of debates concerning the court's roles in judging and writing history about World War II and its aftermath, or any time period for that matter. How might the outcome of these cases and the discussion surrounding them have influenced public attitudes about the justice system? And how might it have influenced their perception of critiques of the justice system in literature? Perhaps in the end, though, these would be moot questions for Aymé. A writer's duty, in his opinion, was not to be a witness, but rather the conscience of his time, regardless of whether or not the public likes what the author has to say. Thank you.